Here's the brutal truth about Obsidian community plugins. They can both supercharge your note-taking workflows and also turn your vault into a complete mess. I've seen over and over again how new Obsidian users make the same mistakes. They get a glimpse of what Obsidian can do, they get excited, they install dozens of community plugins thinking it's going to exponentially multiply the value that they get from their notes and ideas, and then they find themselves overwhelmed and unable to focus on what really matters, which is capturing and connecting those ideas. So this video is the guide to getting started with community plugins that I wish I had at the beginning of my own Obsidian journey. So if you're wondering whether you should dive into community plugins, which ones are actually worth your time, or how to avoid the common mistakes that derail most beginners, then you are in the right place, because today I'm going to show you how to make the most of the community plugins that you add to your Obsidian Vault, share some best practices that will help you keep from falling into what I call the Obsidian Trap, and I'll share which plugins I recommend to give your Vault an immediate productivity boost if you're just getting started. Now this video is the continuation of a series that I've started here on my channel on Obsidian Basics, where I walk through everything you need to know about Obsidian for brand new users. So I'm going to be working these videos in periodically and creating a separate playlist, which you'll be able to see on the channel, so you can go through these videos if that is you. Now I've also added chapters to this video so you can jump straight to the best practices or the recommendations if you like, but obviously the place to start here is with a brief intro as to what community plugins even are. So if you're already familiar, feel free to jump ahead, but for those who are brand new, let's talk about what community plugins do and how to approach adding them to your Obsidian Vault. Now community plugins are basically third-party extensions that you can install to add new functionality to your Obsidian Vault. To enable these, you got to go to Settings, Community Plugins, and then click on Turn on Community Plugins. Keep in mind that all Obsidian plugins do go through an initial review process when they are submitted to the plugins directory. So all plugins must adhere to the Obsidian developer policies, which makes sure that things aren't hidden in the code. Still, if security is absolutely critical to your workflow, you may decide you don't want to turn these on. I'm personally okay with the trade-offs here, and I think most Obsidian users will be. Also, the Obsidian team does a pretty good job of watching over the plugins that get submitted to the directory, so I think generally this is okay, but just something to consider. The one thing you do not want to do if you're concerned about privacy is install plugins outside of the community plugins directory. So for example, there are plugins that do things that are not allowed according to these developer policies. And you can install these via a tool like Brat or by manually downloading the plugin from GitHub and installing it via the file directory on your device. This circumvents the protective measures that are put in place by the Obsidian team though, so unless you 100% trust that source, I highly recommend you do not install plugins outside of the community directory, at least at the beginning. Only using plugins via the community directory gives you a level of protection against potentially malicious code, and there's honestly a lot in that directory that you can use to supercharge your Obsidian workflows. Now I'll get to some of those in my recommendations a little bit later, but for now, let's look at how to find and install your first community plugin. So first, turn on community plugins if you haven't yet, which will then allow you to click the browse button to view the community plugins directory. This will show all of the available community plugins in recently released order, but you can click this button here to change that to most downloaded, recently updated, or alphabetical sort order instead. Now each card on this screen shows the name of the plugin and a short description, as well as some metadata for who created it, how many downloads the plugin has, and when it was last updated. Now keep in mind, some of the newer plugins are not going to have all of this information available on the card. You can scroll through this list to find the plugin that you want to install, or search the directory using the search bar at the top. Now once you find the plugin that you want, click on it to load the plugin listing in the community plugins directory. This will show additional metadata, including the version number of the plugin and the link to the GitHub repository where the plugin actually lives. There will also be a couple of buttons for installing the plugin and copying the share link if you wanted to give someone a link directly to this community plugins directory listing inside of the Obsidian app. Now below the buttons is the contents of the README file included with the plugin, which usually has some additional information about the plugin and how to use it. Some listings are more detailed than others, but most have some demo screenshots at least of the plugin in action, and have some installation instructions for installing either via the community plugins directory or manually. Now, as mentioned earlier, I recommend you stay away from manually installing plugins if you're new to Obsidian. Just use the directory because of the vetting process that the plugins have to go through to get listed there. It's the best way to make sure that you stay safe using these community plugins. Now, once you find a plugin that you want to add to Obsidian, there are a couple of steps. First, you need to click the Install button to install the plugin in your Obsidian Vault. Now, once this is done installing, you'll get a confirmation message in the upper right. But it's actually not ready to be used just yet, as all plugins are toggled off by default once they are installed. So the next step is to click the Enable button to turn the plugin on. Now, depending on the plugin, you may see a couple of additional buttons show up after this plugin is enabled. The first is the Options button, which takes you to the plugin options and is where you can configure the plugin using the settings that ship with that plugin. For plugins that have options like these, you can also access them by going to the Settings, scrolling down to the Community Plugins section, and clicking on the plugin name. So for the calendar plugin, for example, there are settings for how many words each dot on the calendar represents, what day the week starts on, whether you want it to confirm before creating a new note, and whether you want to show the week numbers. But let's jump back to the plugin listing because there are a couple of other things that we should go over first, and you can actually get back there by going into the Community Plugins section of the settings and clicking on the name of the plugin. You can also click the toggle here to turn any installed plugin on or off, but for now, let's go back to the calendar plugin listing in the Community Plugins directory. Now, as you can see, there are a couple of other buttons here. The first is Hotkeys. Clicking this takes you to the Hotkeys section of the settings and shows you all of the commands that were added when you installed this plugin. You can set a hotkey for any of these commands by clicking the plus button and typing the hotkey that you want to use. The hotkey will turn red if there's a conflict with another hotkey. Otherwise, it will save the hotkey to the command so you can run it from anywhere in Obsidian straight from your keyboard. Now, jumping back to the plugin listing, there are also buttons here to disable the plugin, which basically just toggles it off, and to uninstall it completely if you decide you don't want this plugin anymore. You can also copy the link to the plugin listing via the Copy Share Link button that I mentioned earlier, and if the creator of the plugin has it configured, you can also donate to support the plugin development. Since most plugins are distributed free of cost, this is a great way to support developers of plugins that are essential to your PKM workflows. All right, so that's how the Community Plugins directory works, but how do you decide which plugins listed here are actually worth installing? How do you know which plugins are going to continue to be supported and which ones are going to be abandoned? Well, ultimately, you cannot be 100% sure, but there are a couple of things that you should look for that can give you clues as to how well a plugin is currently being supported by its developers. So first, you can look at the number of downloads. Some plugins, like Excalidraw here, have millions of downloads, which makes it much more likely that this plugin is going to be actively developed. A simple way to see which plugins have the most downloads is just to sort the directory by most downloaded. Another clue is when the last update was. So some plugins get updated frequently while others almost never receive updates. For some plugins, like the Calendar plugin, which was updated 5 years ago, this is simply because it hasn't been needed. Since Liam Kane is actually listed on the Obsidian team page and this plugin is used by so many people, I'm actually not too worried about this one, but otherwise it might be a red flag. If you notice a plugin hasn't been updated in a while, you should probably try to figure out why and see if it really has been abandoned. Just keep in mind that neither the number of downloads or the date of last update are definitive indicators of whether a plugin is active or not. They're just clues. But in general, I try to stay away from plugins that don't have many downloads and haven't been updated in a while, as those are the ones that tend to be abandoned by their developers. There's just no incentive for them to continue supporting that. It's basically a red flag that I would use to dig a little bit deeper before really committing to that plugin and adding it to my PKM workflows. Of course, one of the best ways to figure out which plugins are worth adding is to see those plugins in action. I find out about new plugins through YouTube videos like this one that show what the plugins do. Then I decide if I want to incorporate that into my current workflows. So it's only natural that I give you a few recommendations here for community plugins to start with, right? But these recommendations, I have to say, are a little bit different. Now, I've done videos before on topics like my essential plugins or plugins for writers. So in this video, I want to share the best plugins for those who are new to Obsidian. These are plugins that will give you an immediate return on investment without having a steep learning curve or a bunch of configuration that's needed to dial it in just the right way. So the first plugin I'll recommend here is the aforementioned Calendar plugin. This plugin adds a calendar in the right sidebar that you can use to jump to your daily or even weekly notes. And this is the way that I usually navigate my daily notes. And what's nice about this plugin is that when you click on a date in the future, it will render the date tokens in your daily note template file to match. So for example, in my daily notes template file, I use date tokens like double curly brackets, year, dash month, dash day. And then when you create a new daily note from that template file, the date token gets translated into today's date. But if you click a date in the future using the calendar plugin, and that file does not exist yet, the file will be created for that particular date and the date tokens will get rendered to match. So it doesn't matter if you create a new daily note for another day at some point in the future, all of the tokens match the date of the file that the daily note is being created for. Bottom line is that if you use daily notes at all in Obsidian, and I really think you should, this plugin makes it much easier to navigate them. The next plugin I'll recommend is related, and that is periodic notes. Now this plugin is actually developed by the same developer. And this one basically gives you the same options that you have for daily notes that you can apply to other periodic notes like weekly notes, monthly notes, quarterly notes, or even annual notes. I did a whole video on multi-scale planning, which relies heavily on aligning the attentions across my quarterly, weekly, and daily notes, so this one is very important to me. You can set the format for each type of periodic note, the location for those files, and choose separate template files for each type of periodic note. The big thing this plugin gives me is the quarterly note, which I use for my personal retreat process, which I outlined in this other video here if you want to dig deeper. But even if you use a different format, I think there's a lot of value in aligning these different periodic notes regardless of the time frames that you choose to use. The next plugin I'll recommend is called Tag Wrangler. If you use a Tags Core plugin at all, you might have noticed that you can't actually edit your tags in the right sidebar or rename them. Tag Wrangler basically is the solution for this. Once you have Tag Wrangler enabled, you can now go into the tags pane in the right sidebar, click on a tag, select rename, type in the new name for the tag, and the tag will be updated everywhere inside your Obsidian Vault. It kind of boggles my mind that this one hasn't been baked in yet, but it's really handy if you use tags at all, so I recommend that you add this one. The next plugin I'll recommend is called Settings Search. This plugin does exactly what it says on the tin. It gives you a search field inside of the Obsidian settings. Now there are a lot of things hidden in the Obsidian settings. I even did a video recently where I walked through every single Obsidian setting and I explained what each one did. But if you're looking for something and you can't remember where it is, this plugin allows you to just type what you're looking for in the search box and select the option that you want in the search results, which are displayed on the right side of the settings screen. It's very handy for those who are new to Obsidian and can't quite remember where everything is located. The next plugin I recommend is called Callout Manager. Now this plugin lets you configure custom callouts that you can use inside of your Obsidian notes. Callouts are great and I highly recommend that you use them to bring attention to important sections of your notes. And while there are a handful of different callouts that ship with Obsidian, this plugin lets you create your own by choosing the different titles, colors, and icons for each type of callout. So for example, I have a custom callout that I've added to my daily notes template file for the habits that I want to track, which is orange and has an atom icon. I chose the atom icon because when I think of habits, I think of Atomic Habits by James Clear. Using the Callout Manager plugin, I was able to create this custom callout type, which then gets used on every single daily note that I create. So as you get comfortable with Obsidian and you start using callouts more, you'll definitely want to configure some of your own custom callouts using this essential plugin. The next plugin I want to recommend here is called ShareNote. This plugin allows you to take an Obsidian note, upload it to the web using CSS that matches what's in your Obsidian Vault, and then gives you a shareable link that you can share with someone, allowing them to view your note from your vault on the web. It's not a live view of the note, it's basically a published version of it. But if you do a lot of writing in Obsidian and you occasionally find yourself needing to share what you've written with somebody else in a read-only format, you can run a command with this plugin, get the link, paste it inside of your messaging app, and the other party can view your note instantly on the web, just like if they were looking at it inside of your own Obsidian Vault. It's obviously public on the web if you got the URL, although you can set a time interval for when they disappear. But obviously you want to be careful if you're sharing notes that have sensitive information in them. Most of my notes are just things that I've written, so I use this plugin frequently to share them with others before I publish them. So for example, I have someone who helps me edit my videos, and I export my video scripts using this plugin so I can share them with my editor so he has a reference when he's editing. This is a great plugin if you're looking for an easy way to share your notes. Another plugin I recommend is the Recent Files plugin. This adds another icon in the upper left that you can use to show the recent files in your left sidebar. This is handy when you've moved on from a writing project that you want to go back to, but you can't remember the exact name of the file that you were working on. You can just open up the Recent Files tab and it will show you all of the files that you have recently edited with the most recent edits at the top. This is often the quickest way to jump back to something that I had been working on if I decided I wanted to make additional edits or changes. And the last plugin I'll recommend in this video is the Beautitab plugin. This plugin changes the new tab screen in some pretty useful ways. So for example, you can choose between categories of beautiful nature photography or a specific photo if you prefer. You can show recent files if you'd like, a search bar that you can use to search the contents of your Obsidian Vault, and a quote at the bottom that can be configured in the plugin settings. You can choose from either a baked-in library of quotes or you can build your own library of quotes to choose from. I actually don't use quotes for this, but instead have added my life theme as the single quote in my custom quote library so that it gets displayed at the bottom of every new tab that I create inside of Obsidian. This gives me a visual reminder of the why behind everything I do, and I like how I can see it frequently via the settings for this plugin. But even if you don't want to use the quotes, it makes opening a new tab in Obsidian a little bit more fun. All right, so those are my recommended community plugins for new Obsidian users, but before we go, I want to give you just a couple of best practices as you work with community plugins inside your own Obsidian Vault. So first, I recommend that you keep your plugins up to date. Things can occasionally break whenever you update the Obsidian app, but updates to plugins can rectify a lot of these issues. So if you're experiencing some weird behavior in your Obsidian Vault, updating the plugins is one of the first things that you should do to try and see if it fixes it. To update your plugins, click the gear icon to go to the Obsidian settings, click on the Community Plugins button, and then click the Check for Updates button. After checking the directory, Obsidian will tell you how many plugins have updates available, and you can either update them all at once or scroll through the list of plugins and update them by clicking on the Update button for each one individually. I do this every week or two, and even though I'm a little hesitant to automatically update to new Obsidian versions, I have no reservations about updating plugins, and I do my best to try to keep up to date on all of my installed community plugins. The next tip I want to give you is one that I mentioned in previous videos, but it's worth calling out again here. And that is to use the command palette to discover new commands whenever you install a new Obsidian plugin. You can invoke the command palette by using Command P on Mac or Control P on Windows, then just start typing the name of the plugin that you've installed to get the list of commands that you are now able to run. This is an easy way to discover functionality in the plugin, and the command palette will also show you any keyboard hotkeys that are associated with that command on the right side of the command palette as well. The next thing I want to mention here is that it's important to not add too much to your Obsidian Vault. So each new plugin that you install slows down the app. It's also a possible source of bugs and unexpected behaviors. So in general, the less community plugins you use, the easier it is to troubleshoot things and the faster your Obsidian Vault will perform. But you really have to find the balance for yourself between speed and functionality here though. So I'm not just going to give you a recommended number of community plugins to shoot for. Just keep in mind that each plugin that you install comes with a performance cost, and you want to limit the ones that you use to the ones that are actually going to contribute to your workflows. So that actually leads to the next tip here, which is to regularly prune your plugins. Every couple of months, I go through all of my installed plugins and I look for the ones that I can either disable or uninstall completely. I tend to like trying new plugins and figuring out ways to improve my PKM workflows, but often the results of these experiments don't stick. So every time I go through that list, I'm able to find several that I no longer need and I can get rid of. If you regularly prune your plugin lists like this, you'll keep your vault lean and healthy. The last tip here is arguably the most important, and that is to only install plugins based on something that you wish to add to your current workflows. It's easy to watch YouTube videos and get excited about new plugins, but if you just install them and you never take the time to set them up or do anything with them, they can very quickly add a lot of cruft to your system. So I recommend you don't install a plugin just to see what it can do, but instead you only add plugins that you think will improve your current workflows in specific ways. You're much more likely to get value from a plugin when you have an idea of how it fits with everything else that you're currently doing. And in general, you want to avoid installing complicated plugins in particular without a clear idea of how to use them. So plugins like Data View or MetaBind, you really need to know that you're gonna go down a rabbit hole when you install plugins like this, or you need some practical examples on how they can actually be useful. That's actually one of the big reasons I put together my Life HQ Vault, which has all of my workflows pre-built and all of the settings are pre-configured. I've been experimenting with Obsidian workflows for over 5 years now, and I put together a pre-packaged version of those workflows along with over 60,000 words of documentation, including screenshots of all the necessary settings and how they work, to give you a way to start getting tangible value from your Obsidian Vault fast. It's not intended to be a set it and forget it type of thing. My hope is that you take what I've got in Life HQ and you tweak it and you make it your own over time. But it's the quickest way to get up and running with powerful PKM workflows for journaling, content creation, task and project management, and much, much more. You can find out more about Life HQ by going to the website lifehq.practicalpkm.com. All right, so that'll do it for this video. Hopefully this will help you get up and running with community plugins in a way that you will not regret later. As I mentioned earlier, this is the latest in my Obsidian for Beginners series, and so far I've also done a couple of other beginner videos. One is a complete walkthrough of all the Obsidian settings. I've also done a tier list review of all the included core plugins, which shows what each one of those does. There will be links to those videos in the description below. If you're wondering where to go next as someone who's just getting started with Obsidian, I'd actually recommend that you check out one of those videos next. I'd also recommend that you download my free Obsidian Starter Vault, which has a bunch of additional Obsidian tips, templates, and resources to help you get more out of your notes and ideas. I've added the tips and best practices that I mentioned in this video, as well as all of my recommendations for community plugins for those who are new to Obsidian, and you can download it for free right now by going to vault.practicalpkm.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another video.